I've got two failed comfort valves for the Watts hot water circulator system. This was the original Watts part and failed after 4 or 6 years. When they failed more recently, I bought this no-name replacement and it wouldn't even pass the self-test. I'm going to see if I can fix both of these. First, we're going to do a self or diagnostic test on the devices. If we presume that this sink had a comfort valve underneath it, first you would turn off the cold water supply and then you would open the cold water faucet. The water should flow through the spigot until it gets warm, at which point the comfort valve closes. First, I'll close off the hot spigot side, and then I'll connect what's going to be our hot water to the hot inside. Now I'll turn on the hot water. The water's cold. We're actually only a few feet from the hot water heater. The water's hot already, and there's no sign of it reducing the flow. There's two ways these can fail. Failing to close when the water gets hot, or failing to open when the water's cold to let the water circulate until it gets warm. This one that I just bought a few weeks ago fails to ever close, and that matched the comments from some purchasers online. Now let's see what happens with the old Watts unit. Pretty sure it failed to open as the water got hot, otherwise I never would have noticed there was a problem. With the recent purchase that failed to close, you start to notice your water on the cold side always has too much heat in it. The water is already hot from the previous test, but the sensor is not very hot, I suppose. Yeah, sure enough, it's blocked instantly. So it's not opening at all. I'll have to simulate cold water to prove that it opens when the water isn't yet warm. Okay, let's try the Watts unit again now that I've both run cold water through the line and I stuck it in the freezer for a couple minutes to make sure it's cold. But again, I expect this to fail to open. No. So I'm going to try to fix both of these. One that fails to open and one that fails to close. We'll see what happens. We're going to need 3 tools. A needle nose plier to pull this pin out. We're going to sort of lever it up. And then when it's time to put the pin back in on this side, you're going to need a custom tool that I made from a 1/2-inch dowel where you notch it out so that you can hold that pin in as you push it in from this side with a pair of pliers. So first you're going to reach in at a downward angle and lift that pin up. You can see it's out 1/8 of an inch. When it's fully clear, the pieces inside are spring-loaded and they're going to tend to pop out. So keep the needle nose pliers in there until you fully wedge it out. The pin itself is force fit, so you don't really have to worry about that flying away. But now I just had the springs release on me and we can see if the pieces fall out. There you go. So here's what you've got. You got a little screen, a large spring, a small spring on the other end, and this rod is connected to a little piston that goes in a brass cylinder connected to this, what seems to be a plastic seat. And there's a rubber boot over it that's a little bit stuck on. And there's also one last part of the mechanism. There's a contraption that probably allows the water to go in only one direction. I did manage to pull this out and don't see any parts that look like they're worth messing around with. I can manage to draw the rubber boot back. You can start to see that it's some sort of brass cylinder. I'm not able to spin the piston part freely from the cylinder, so that could explain the fact that it fails to open. What I'm going to do is get a drop of penetrant and see if that frees it up. I can just, before putting any penetrant or WD-40 on it, I can just barely rotate it. And you notice the white chalkiness there. So that's probably mineral buildup. All right, let's see if a drop of penetrant helps. Getting a little looser. And there we go. Now you can see this really is a piston and a cylinder, but it was totally seized up. Hard to know exactly what causes the expansion that makes the whole mechanism work. I can't really believe it's just air, because it would have to be a pretty high tolerance fitting. I would imagine there's something inside there that gives it a little bit of expansion from heat. I can feel some springiness, so who knows what that material is in there. I'll put the boot back down, and then we'll talk about reassembly. We've got the small spring over one end of the piston, the large spring over the other end, and put it in this end. You might have to shake it a little to get it to fall in. And then the screen on top. I didn't have to clean this screen at all, but if it shows a lot of debris, by all means clean it off. Now comes the tricky part, because you notice we don't even see the push rod. So we have to put in a custom tool with the notch in the same orientation as the pin, push it down, and then drive the pin in using a pair of pliers. I've got it about 3/4 of the way. I'm holding it with my fingers, and I'm pushing it the rest of the way with the tip of pliers. I think I have it pretty good. First time I tried that, the pin went 2/3 of the way, jammed into the screen, and I had to push down a little more with the custom tool and drive the pin the rest of the way. If you don't get it all the way, it's okay, but you run the risk of having the whole thing spring out on you. Make sure you don't lose the parts. But if you get it halfway, you might have to release it, pull the pin back out, which is where you could let the parts fly loose if you weren't aware of what was going to happen. Okay, this is the Watts unit, which wouldn't open at all. So now it's time to test it out again and see if I actually repaired a Watts comfort sensor. I'm a little concerned that this side could be a problem, since it required virtually no force to pull it out, and all I did was push it back in. In actual use, it would have water pressure on both sides, I suppose. Maybe water pressure only pushes it toward the hot side. We'll see if it just falls apart when I do the self-test. All right, here we are with the Watts unit that previously wouldn't open at all. I tested the water's cold. Our circulator hasn't been operating recently. The only question is whether the pressure will just blow out the mechanism on this other side, which I don't quite understand. But here goes. It's open. So it's open, which it wasn't previously, and the water is going back to the cold side, not the faucet. I wonder if that's a problem. The water's getting hot and it's shutting off. So at least at some level, I fixed this thing. It's a miracle. Let's see if anyone can reproduce this success at home. And if so, please, by all means, post a comment on YouTube. Thanks. Bye.